It was June, and we were camping near Asheville, North Carolina, me, my partner Eli, and our dog Luna. We had pitched our tent near the Appalachian Trail, just off the riverbank where we'd spent the day kayaking. It had been a long, intense day on the water with a couple of nerve-wracking moments, so we were beyond ready to unwind. Our spot was maybe 10 feet from the trail, with the river just behind that. We were running low on weed, but we had edibles, so we each took a bit to help us relax. Eli was half asleep in his hammock, swaying gently, while I lay on a towel near the tent by the river's edge. It was peaceful, until this guy walked up out of nowhere. He was rambling something about trash, and I was immediately confused. He had a backpack and an Appalachian Trail shirt, so I figured he was a thru hiker. It turned out he wanted us to toss out his trash for him. That's not a super weird request on the trail, but we were literally a 5-minute walk from a parking area with a dumpster. I told him as much, thinking he'd rather just drop it off himself. But then he pulled out a fat bag of weed and offered me some in exchange for taking his trash. I didn't really get it, but hey, free weed? I said sure and took a few nugs. He added his trash to our bag, and I made small talk, asked if he was through hiking, how long he'd been out, the usual. He said he'd been going for a couple of months, and asked if he could hang out and have a beer. I said sure. He seemed like he could use some company, and I wasn't doing anything. He seemed normal enough. I did think, briefly, that he might have approached because I looked like I was alone. Eli's hammock was kind of hidden from where the guy had come up. That suspicion was confirmed when Eli popped his head up, and the hiker looked surprised. From then on, he kept reassuring us he wasn't one of those creepy people, which, honestly, is exactly what someone creepy would say. Eli and I lit up by the river and offered him a few hits since he'd gifted us some. He accepted, coughed a lot, and that's when things got strange. I've seen people act weird when they're too high, but this was next level. He talked nonstop, but so quietly we could barely hear a word. He stared at the river, mumbling to himself, occasionally glancing at us like we were part of the conversation. He drank at least 3 beers and smoked 2 cigarettes. This wasn't a short visit. He just wouldn't leave. Eventually, he started yelling at Siri on his phone, calling her names. It was uncomfortable and bizarre. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do I seem like a serial killer? Eli and I looked at each other, both thinking the exact same thing. It's time for this guy to go. We nervously laughed and said, "Oh, like a 1," trying to play it off as a joke. But we were both on edge. After that, we climbed into the hammock together and stopped engaging with him. He claimed he was going to finish one last cigarette and then head out. That cigarette felt like it lasted a century. I was watching the ember inch down, praying he'd just leave. Finally, he packed up and walked off. But it was nearly dark, and we knew he couldn't have gone far before setting up camp somewhere nearby. That night, we were completely convinced he'd come back to kill us. We heard people pass on the trail a few times, but it was other hikers we'd seen earlier. One couple who seemed high and might have been living in the woods. We even made a plan. If he came back, we'd grab Luna and float down the river to the boat ramp. He never returned, and we didn't see him again. Still, the encounter was enough to shake us. Maybe he was just socially awkward and had been alone too long. But maybe there was something darker at play. Either way, I'm so glad I wasn't alone when he showed up. I grew up in the southern stretch of the Appalachian Mountains, about 30 minutes outside Boone, North Carolina. The ridges and hollows of that ancient region have always felt like home. Some of the rock formations go back over 1 billion years, older than terrestrial life itself. And like most places that have existed for ages, these mountains hold secrets, some gentle, some far from it. Take the Brown Mountain Lights, for example. I've seen them from Wise Man's View and never felt afraid. They're not good or bad, they just exist. And sometimes when you walk into an old, long-abandoned church near the edge of my parents' land, you feel this peaceful warmth, like the first truly sunny day of the season. This story is not about that kind of energy. This is about something that felt entirely wrong. Roughly 10 years ago, I was attending night classes at a local technical college, Blue Ridge Tech, working toward a certification in automotive repair. Most days, I'd head to class around 2 p.m. after finishing my shift at a part-time job, and by the time I was driving home, it would be close to 10:30 at night. That evening started like any other. I was behind the wheel of my old 1973 Dodge W200 pickup, Oil Daisy, on my usual route home. Sometimes, if I was bored or restless, I'd take the back roads instead of sticking with I-40. But that night, I wanted to get home and get some sleep, so I could head out early for a sunrise hike. I exited I-40 and turned onto the road that leads to my parents' place. It was darker than usual. No animal sounds drifted through my open windows. No frogs, crickets, nothing. I'd never had anxiety in my life, but something felt off. Then I noticed the gas station near the exit had no lights on. That place stayed open 24/7. Still, I brushed it off. Maybe the power was out. I kept driving, shifting gears slowly, trying not to make more noise than necessary. I leaned over the steering wheel to look up at the sky, moonlight peeking through, but hardly any stars. That was strange. Normally, the night sky in that part of Appalachia is breathtaking. You can see the Milky Way on clear nights. But this time, it was like the stars themselves had vanished. As I rounded a sharp left and then coasted through a straightaway, my eyes fell on a decaying barn I always admired. It's the kind of structure that's seen history pass it by. But just as I was thinking about it, a massive, sickly-looking dog darted into the road, no more than 10 feet in front of me. Daisy didn't have great brakes. I heard a fence post in the bed of the truck bounce up and slam back down as I hit the brakes and skidded to a halt. My first thought was, crap, now I've hit someone's dog. Around there, that can start real trouble, depending on the dog and the owner. I sat there, breathing hard, trying to make sense of what just happened. Then came a smell, rot. I'd smelled decomposing animals before, and this was unmistakable. I figured maybe there was roadkill nearby. I slipped the truck into reverse, intending to back up and check on the animal. But when I looked in my rearview mirror, my blood went cold. It was standing up. That thing, whatever I had hit, was no longer on 4 legs. It was upright, easily over 10 feet tall. My truck hood is 5 feet high, and this thing had stood that tall on all 4s. Now it was towering over the road. It turned its head toward the truck, and I got a brief look at its face. It wasn't a dog. It wasn't a man. It was something horribly in between. Its skin hung loose, gray and lifeless, like it didn't belong. Patches of matted fur clung to its body like disease. One of its arms was longer than the other, and both dragged unnaturally. Its face! I still have nightmares about it. There were eye sockets, but no eyes. The nose was flat and crushed looking. Its mouth, oh God, the teeth. They didn't seem arranged like a normal creature's. They jutted out at odd angles, like they didn't belong in the mouth and were trying to escape. It looked straight through me, like it could see my thoughts. Then a porch light clicked on at a nearby house, and the thing whipped its head in that direction and bolted into the woods, on 2 legs. I threw the truck into gear and peeled out of there, tires screaming. When I got home, my parents were asleep. I went straight to the basement, locked every door, and loaded every gun I owned. I couldn't tell them what I'd seen. Who would believe me? That night, the house was eerily quiet. Even the dogs, who normally bark at deer or raccoons in the woods, were silent. Around 3 a.m., after hours of lying in bed with my shotgun, I started to doze off. Then that smell came back, the stench of death. Faint at first, then stronger. It filled the basement. I crept out of my room, weapon ready, and moved toward Dad's office, which had big glass doors facing the forest. I covered my tactical light and flipped it on as I turned toward the windows. It was there, standing at the edge of the woods, staring into the light. Eyes or no eyes, it knew where I was. I panicked. I shut off the light, ran to the living room, and hit the outdoor floodlights. When they came on, it had moved. It was closer, standing between the house and the trees. I opened the door and fired. Every round I had in the shotgun. It let out a scream like nothing I've ever heard, half human, half something else, and vanished into the forest. The dogs went berserk. My parents came running, asking what was going on. I told them a bear was in the trash. I couldn't say what I'd really seen. I didn't sleep for days. Eventually, things returned to normal. I pushed it out of my mind, until 6 years later, when my wife and I were visiting her family nearby. Her mother's house is just a few miles from my parents'. That night, we were walking her dog, Max, back from the old kennel up the trail. He'd been quarantined after a raccoon bite. As we were heading back, that same feeling crept over me. Then the smell. My wife joked about the stink, but I couldn't laugh. I told her I'd explain later. She grew up around these woods, she knew. She sensed it too. Then we heard barking from the direction of the kennel. But Max was with us, and the bark was identical to his. Perfect mimicry. Max turned, growled, and got ready to fight. I had to drag his 150-pound bulk back to the house. Her mom flipped on the floodlights, and I caught a glimpse of something, at the very edge of the light, turning and running back into the forest. My wife looked at me and said, "What the hell was that?" The next morning, her older sister came over. She's part of an old line of Appalachian folk healers. She brought herbs, chants, and tools to ward off bad spirits. We went to the kennels to bless them too. They were destroyed. Concrete cracked. Chain link fence torn from the posts. Doghouses flattened. The stench was unbearable. After the blessing, her sister pulled us aside and said, "Don't go into the woods at night. Not until it's gone." Years later, after we moved to Delaware for her military posting, I thought I'd left it behind. But I was wrong. It found us. I spent a few formative years growing up in a small Kentucky town nestled between foothills, remote and thick with trees. When I was around 10, I moved there to live with my dad and grandparents. We lived in a cul-de-sac surrounded by forest on every side. Our neighbors were all family, but there was nothing beyond us except deep woods. No one lived across the road or behind our house. Just ridges and trees. My grandma had a list of rules for me when I moved in. Some made sense. Don't wander off alone. Don't mess with wildlife. But some were strange. She'd say things like, "If you hear your name called from the woods, don't answer. If you see someone in the trees who looks familiar, know you didn't. Come home." I figured it was just country superstition. I was a kid. What did I know? It was August, and I was 11 when this happened. My dad and I had cleared a trail through the tall grass and berry bushes next to the double-wide we lived in. We used to camp out there often. It was close enough to check on Grandma, but far enough that it felt like a real camping experience. That night, everything was normal at first. The woods were alive with sound, crickets, frogs, the stream running along the road. We had a fire going, and my dad eventually headed back up to the house, about a quarter-mile away, to check on Grandma and grab a few more beers. Before he left, he told me not to mess with the fire. I sat by the flames alone, watching sparks dance up into the dark. But then, everything changed. The bugs stopped buzzing. The wind stopped moving. The stream, which had always been loud, sounded like it was a mile away. The silence was suffocating. Then I tasted it, a sharp, metallic tang in my throat, like blood or burning steel. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe for a second. I was already uncomfortable, but now I was scared. I didn't know why, but I wanted to leave. Just then, my dad came back through the brush. He looked irritated and immediately said, "What the hell did you throw in the fire? It smells like burnt metal all the way up the trail." I told him I hadn't touched anything, even pointed to the logs to prove it. He seemed unconvinced but dropped it, saying a storm was probably rolling in. We needed to head back, so we left the tent and started walking up the path toward the house. Something strange happens when lightning hits in the forest. It lights everything up like midday, but only for a moment. After that flash, it's pitch black again. That night, it was drizzling lightly, and the only light we had came from the windows of the house up ahead. The first flash of lightning came, and everything was illuminated for a half second. Then another, closer this time. That's when I saw it. Across the stream, past the ditch and just beyond the first line of trees, something stood on the edge of the forest. A tall, dark silhouette. Then darkness again. I froze, unsure of what I'd seen. I didn't want the lightning to strike again. But it did. And this time, the figure was closer, right near the trees just across from our yard. I bolted for the house. When I stumbled inside, my grandma was at the sink doing dishes. She asked why I looked so panicked. I told her I thought I saw something in the woods. Her entire demeanor changed. She immediately called my dad over and told him to lock every window and door. He was tipsy but listened. I slept in her room that night. The next morning, we found the tent ripped open. Not slashed or torn like an animal would have done. It looked like someone had grabbed the fabric and pulled until it gave out. Then we heard my uncle, who lived up the hill, had lost all 8 of his chickens. Their heads were gone, clean off, but there was no blood. Nothing left behind. For the next few weeks, we weren't allowed to wait for the school bus alone. Every kid had to be accompanied by an adult. My dad had to be late to work every day just to take me. Every time I tried to bring it up, someone would change the subject. I was dismissed, like it was just a child's imagination. But it wasn't until years later that I fully understood. I was in my early 20s, talking about that summer with some cousins during a Halloween get-together. When I told the story, my aunt freaked out. "Don't you tell them that. Don't you bring that evil here," she snapped. It hit me then. This wasn't just something they brushed aside. They deliberately silenced me. Later, when I started reading stories on Reddit and other forums, I found a name for what I'd seen. The same name my aunt had muttered that night. Goatman. I still can't describe its features clearly. My memory of it is more about the feeling than the image. But the metallic taste in my mouth, that I remember vividly. And if you ever find yourself deep in the hills of Kentucky, take my grandma's advice seriously. Don't go into the woods alone. Don't answer when your name is called. And if you see someone familiar in the trees, no, you didn't. I'm 23 now, living in New York City, but I spent a few strange and unforgettable weeks last summer in rural West Virginia. My grandparents live out there, way out there. When I say the middle of nowhere, I mean it. Their nearest neighbor is an hour away, and the closest town is barely more than a cluster of buildings. A gas station, a church, a tiny grocery store, and a single-screen cinema that only plays movies on weekends. Last summer, I just finished my junior year of college when my family called in a favor. My grandfather, whom I'll call Raymond, had undergone hip surgery and needed help getting around. My grandmother, whom everyone just calls Nana, was too frail to manage everything on her own. Since most of my family lives on the West Coast, and I was the closest relative by several states, they asked if I could stay with them for 2 weeks to help out while he recovered. I'm a city guy. I've lived in apartment buildings my whole life. I'm used to the sound of traffic, sirens, people shouting late at night. But I've also always enjoyed visits to my grandparents' place. There's something clean and honest about the air out there, and the silence, though eerie at first, has a kind of peace to it. So I agreed and packed my things. The first week went smoothly. My grandfather wasn't bedridden, just limited in motion, so I helped him up and down the stairs, handed him tools when he tinkered in the garage, and took their blue heeler Scout for his daily walks. Normally, Grandpa handled those himself, but now it was my responsibility. Scout was a good dog, loyal, obedient, and alert. Grandpa swore the dog could sense game animals from a half-mile off. He was used to walking deep into the woods behind the house, along a narrow trail that snaked through the forest and ended at an old creek bed. He and Scout had walked that trail every morning and evening for years, and now it was my turn. I didn't like those woods. Even as a kid, something about them made me uneasy. They were too quiet. The trees grew tall and close together, so even during the day, the light barely filtered through. At night, it was like walking through a tunnel of darkness. Still, I chalked it up to being a city kid and brushed off the feeling. Until the 7th night. It was a little after 8:30 p.m., and the sun had just dipped behind the mountaintops. I leashed up Scout and headed toward the trail. The air was humid, thick with the scent of pine and damp soil. Crickets chirped, and the occasional chirp of a tree frog echoed from the creek. I was maybe 10 minutes into the walk when I heard it, a whistle. It was soft at first, coming from the left side of the path. I stopped mid-step. Scout did too. His ears perked up, and he growled low in his throat, the fur along his back rising. The whistle came again. Not a bird whistle. No chirp or trill. This was 2 distinct notes, whistled slowly, like a person signaling someone. It sounded intentional. I shined my flashlight in the direction of the sound. Nothing. Just trees and shadows. I called out, "Hello." No response. Scout started to back up, tail tucked low, his growl deepening. I'd never seen him act like that. He wasn't scared of bears, raccoons, or even the occasional coyote. But whatever this was, it freaked him out. And that was enough for me. I turned around and headed back, fast. Scout didn't need encouragement. He stayed pressed close to my leg the whole way. We made it back to the house in record time. When I got inside, I told my grandparents what had happened. Nana went pale. Grandpa looked alarmed but tried to hide it. "Did you whistle back?" Nana asked immediately. "No," I said, confused. "Why would I?" She nodded, visibly relieved, then leaned forward on her cane and said firmly, "You didn't hear anything. Don't talk to it. Don't listen to it. And don't go back in there." I asked her what she meant, but she wouldn't elaborate. She just repeated herself. "You didn't hear anything." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the old house creaking in the wind. I kept thinking about that whistle. The tone of it. The way it sounded like someone trying to get your attention. It wasn't playful. It wasn't musical. It was calculated. The next morning, Nana had changed the routine. Instead of walking Scout through the woods, I was to walk him around the house. 50 laps, she said. It's enough to keep his legs strong and his heart healthy. So that's what I did, for the next few nights, anyway. I walked circles around the house, sometimes with Scout tugging at the leash, trying to lead me toward the trail. But I didn't go back. Not after what I'd heard. Not after the way Nana had looked at me. 3 nights later, something changed. It was a little past 9 p.m. I was finishing up our walk, counting the last few laps around the back porch, when I heard it again, the whistle. This time, it came from behind the detached garage, only about 10 yards from the house. Scout stopped cold. The whistle repeated, 2 slow notes. Exactly the same as before. Scout started barking, loud and angry, lunging toward the garage. I yanked him back and rushed inside, slamming the door behind me. I locked it and checked every window. Nothing was out there. Nothing I could see, anyway. I told my grandparents again. This time, they didn't say anything. Grandpa stared out the window. Nana just whispered, "Don't answer it." That night, I lay in bed with the lights on. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of wind outside the window made me jump. I thought about calling someone, my friends back in the city. But what would I say? "Hey, I think someone is whistling at me from the woods." No. They'd laugh. They'd say I was being paranoid. And maybe I was. I stayed inside the rest of the week. I didn't take Scout out at night anymore. I let him out in the fenced backyard during the day, and that was it. I kept the doors locked and the curtains closed. But the whistle kept coming. Sometimes it was further away. Sometimes it was right outside the window. Always the same, 2 notes, slow and deliberate. On my final night there, I was packing my things when Scout started growling again. I looked at the window and saw nothing. But I heard it, clear as day. Whistle. Whistle. This time, it was coming from the tree line. And this time, it wasn't alone. Another whistle answered from the opposite direction. Then another. Then another. 4 or 5 different sources. All around the house. All whistling in turn. I grabbed Scout, turned off the lights, and sat in the dark. I could hear them circling. The front porch creaked. Something scraped against the siding of the house. My heart was racing. Then, one of them tried the doorknob. I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the hallway with a kitchen knife in hand, Scout pressed against my legs, growling low and steady. In the morning, they were gone. I left that day. I didn't look back. When I returned to the city, I told my girlfriend about everything. She's Muslim, and her parents are originally from Yemen. When she told them about the whistling, her father grew very serious. "Don't respond to whistles at night," he said. "It's a sign that something is near. Something not meant to be seen." They believed me. That was the worst part.